Tomorrow morning, at precisely 11:36 Universal Time, something will happen that we were told would be invisible. They said the sun would swallow it, that the heat, the glare, the noise of light itself would hide everything worth seeing. So we prepared for silence, for absence, for another mystery the world would never watch unfold. But the sky had other plans. For months, every broadcast, every press note repeated the same melody. At perihelion, no observation possible. Object will pass behind the sun. A calm, confident refrain that asked us not to look, and so most didn't, because when the voice of certainty speaks, we tend to lower our eyes. But truth has a strange habit of leaking through the smallest cracks, and sometimes a whisper from the edge of night is enough to make the universe flinch. On October 26th, 3 days before the predicted invisibility, a small international observatory known as the Northern Skies Array turned its lenses toward the dawn. It was supposed to be a calibration run, a routine scan of the solar limb before the cameras were powered down for safety. Instead, what appeared on their monitors made them pause. A faint, emerald signature, quiet but undeniable, hovering just beside the sun's corona. It wasn't behind, it was beside. For hours, the team rechecked everything: filters, coordinates, tracking alignment. The right ascension came back the same, 13 HG 38 Mi 44.9s. Declination, plus 07 again to 40 yin 32.5. Apparent magnitude, roughly 15.2, dim but stable. And right there, in that narrow ribbon of light between Venus and Specker, they found it again. 3IATLAS, glowing softly. Its tail is folding like silk in slow motion. We can still hear the hum of that control room. Not excitement, not yet. Just disbelief suspended in quiet air. They compared the position to the JPL Horizons model. The offset was slight but real. 15 arc minutes off predicted course. A small deviation, too small to make headlines, too perfect to dismiss as noise. The data whispered something nudged it. No explosion, no fragment trail, just a change in where light decided to fall. And that was enough to rewrite the script. By the time the Northern Skies Array released its unfiltered composite image, the world had already moved on to other stories: elections, markets, storms. Yet somewhere between those headlines a single post slipped through, a green spark half hidden by solar haze, with a caption that simply read, "We were told not to look, we looked anyway." Within hours, mirrors turned, telescopes reoriented, and across the planet the night began to fill with questions. We remember that evening vividly. The air itself felt charged, not electric but aware, as if every signal, every sensor, every heart was waiting for the sun to blink. We refreshed data feeds like breathing, one frame after another, the same dot, the same glow, slipping round the rim of a star that was supposed to hide it. And somewhere, in that thin space between what was seen and what was believed, the lie began to loosen. NASA's official feed remained steady, calm, insisting that nothing visible had occurred. ESA's statement followed. All instruments nominal, no deviation observed. But behind those words, you could almost hear the sound of a story holding its breath, because the light was there, and it refused to disappear. At 11:36 UTC, October 29th, 2025, the moment of perihelion arrived. We were still awake, our screens dimmed, our rooms darkened to match the void outside. Every instinct expected silence. Instead, we watched a faint oscillation, a heartbeat of brightness, pulsing once, twice, then settling into a rhythm that seemed too deliberate to be random. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to make even the algorithms hesitate. Later, Dr. Elias Carter from Harvard's Theoretical Astrophysics Group would call it a photometric echo, a pattern suggesting energy transfer not fully explained by solar wind. Others would dismiss it as a coincidence. But those who had watched from the start knew better. The object was not being swallowed. It was dancing. We replayed the footage again and again, frame by frame, until we began to see something almost human in its patience, like a presence waiting to be understood, not discovered. The data showed another anomaly, a brief surge in luminosity, double what was expected from inverse square models, followed by a gentle fade. It wasn't just reflecting sunlight, it was responding to it. And in that moment, every model, every prediction, every confident press release became just another version of the dark. We sat there in the soft hum of machines, feeling the room grow smaller, the world grows larger, and the silence grow heavier. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it means the signal is simply too slow to reach us yet. Somewhere, across 60 million kilometers of space, 3IATLAS curved around the sun like a whisper finding its voice. And as it did, the light that had been meant to blind us became the very thing that revealed it. There's a moment after revelation when sound itself feels different. The air in the room stops moving. Even the instruments seem to listen. That's how it felt when the Northern Skies Array sent its final message to the network. Object confirmed, visible, trajectory stable, light curve consistent with active emission. No exclamation marks, no claims of discovery, just the facts, spoken softly, like someone whispering we were right to look. By sunset, the footage had spread. Astronomers on 4 continents verified the same observation. Amateurs pointed their lenses at the twilight and found the faint green streak, the signature of carbon diatomic fluorescence. Everywhere, the story began to unspool. The comet that was never supposed to be seen was seen. The silence that was promised was broken. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the light. It was the quiet way it changed us. For the first time in a long time, we looked up not for answers, but for presence. And in that stillness, something began to shift. The universe didn't seem far anymore. It seemed attentive, as if the space between stars wasn't empty but listening. Later, when the world argued about what it meant, when agencies issued clarifications, when pundits spoke of misinterpretations, none of it mattered much, because we had seen it with our own eyes. Not through filtered feeds, not through official channels, but through the breath of light itself. And that light, soft, deliberate, unhurried, taught us something we had forgotten, that truth does not vanish when it is hidden. It waits. We think about that now as 3IATLAS drifts outward again, its orbit stretches into the cold. The official bulletins will speak of distance and decay, but we remember the pulse, that quiet heartbeat against the glare, the moment when a lie collapsed under the weight of its own certainty. And maybe that's all awakening ever is. Not a shout, not a revelation, but the gentle sound of reality correcting itself. Tomorrow, the world will move on, the feeds will refresh, the noise will return. But somewhere out there, still turning in its perfect curve, a small emerald fragment of interstellar ice continues its long, unhurried reply. And if we listen softly enough, we might still hear it, not speaking to us, but through us. Because the lie was never about what we couldn't see. It was about what we were told not to notice. And now, we notice everything. After the light came memory. And memory, like gravity, never really lets go. 3 days after the perihelion, November 1st, 2025, as the last images of 3IATLAS drifted outward through the data streams, another anomaly appeared. It wasn't green, it wasn't glowing, it wasn't even moving very fast, but it was there, quiet, steady, circling us. They called it 2025 PN7, and almost no one noticed. It began as a whisper inside NASA's orbital debris catalogue, a faint point, magnitude 17, plotted near the trailing side of Earth's orbit, just beyond geosynchronous altitude. At first, it looked like space junk, an echo of the thousands of forgotten objects launched during the Cold War. But when the modelers ran its path backward, year by year, decade by decade, the orbit refused to decay. It stayed stable, almost deliberately stable. That's when someone in Houston said it out loud. It's been with us since the 60s. We were still sifting through the light curve data of 3IATLAS when the story reached us. The room fell silent, not because it was impossible, but because it was too possible. A second moon, one that never left. Its orbital period matched Earth's rotation almost perfectly, making it what astronomers call a quasi-satellite, bound not by gravity alone, but by resonance, a subtle dance between pull and release. It was like discovering a ghost in the sky that had been following us for 60 years. The first recovered documents pointed to 1964, the height of the Cold War. The year's satellites carried microphones instead of cameras, and signals were measured not in bits but in fear. In an archived manifest labelled Project Block L, Zond 1, an early Soviet mission meant for Venus, there was a line item for an upper stage that was never officially tracked after launch. It was simply listed as hardware expended, but the math said otherwise. The orbit matched, the timing matched, and the metallic composition inferred from its albedo, aluminum-titanium alloy, was consistent with the old Block L design. A relic of another era, still circling in the dark, like a forgotten thought too heavy to fall. Dr. Elias Carter, Avi Loeb's colleague at Harvard, was the first to suggest the unthinkable. If it's not a rocket stage, what if it was a platform? We remember the silence that followed that sentence. Not disbelief, but the kind of silence that comes when you realize how long something might have been watching. A platform, a listener, a relic that never stopped listening. Every orbit 2025 PN7 passes over the same latitudes. It drifts slowly, half a degree per year, a patient observer caught between Earth's gravity and the Moon's pull. Its motion traces a lopsided infinity, a loop that never closes. When radar reflected off its surface for the first time, the return wasn't smooth. It shimmered, as if the surface wasn't uniform, as if panels had been added, replaced or adjusted. And that's when the Cold War stopped feeling like history and started feeling like a mirror. We looked back at the archives from both sides of the Iron Curtain. In declassified Soviet telemetry, there were entries for a lost transmitter. In NASA's own tracking logs, there were ghost returns at similar coordinates, always dismissed as radar noise. Yet, when we aligned those data points with the modern orbital model of 2025 PN7, the echoes matched. Exactly. Like two instruments playing the same note decades apart. No one said it out loud, but we all felt the same quiet chill. Whatever this object was, it had been orbiting above every war, every launch, every satellite since before the internet existed, and no one had ever asked why it stayed. Dr. Carter proposed a hypothesis that felt less like science and more like a confession. What if 2025 PN7 wasn't debris at all? What if it was meant to stay invisible? Not to hide from us, but to remind us how easily we forget what we put up there. His words hung in the dark like a slow orbit of their own. The official explanation, when it finally came, was simple. Too simple. Probably a spent Block L upper stage from Zond 1, captured in Earth's co-orbital resonance. The kind of sentence that solves nothing, but satisfies the procedure. The kind of line that makes the mystery quiet enough to file away. But numbers don't keep secrets well. Infrared imaging from ESA's Gaia 2 satellite showed periodic temperature spikes along its sunlit side. Too localized to be natural, like something inside was regulating its heat. Protecting or conserving. In the next few nights, radio observatories across Europe began scanning the region. Most heard only the background hiss, but one, a small dish in Finland, recorded a faint repeating pulse at 8.4 gigahertz, 3 seconds on, 21 seconds off, patterned enough to make even skeptics frown. No official correlation was announced, no press release, just a quiet note in an open access log. An intermittent emission consistent with artificial modulation. Then the log vanished. For a few weeks the story hovered online like the object itself, half visible, half ignored. Scientists debated, agencies denied, and the rest of the world scrolled past back into the rhythm of daily news. But for us the coincidence was too perfect to ignore. Because 2025 PN7 wasn't just appearing out of nowhere, it had been rediscovered exactly as 3IATLAS was passing perihelion. Two anomalies, arriving 60 years apart, mirroring each other in timing and tone. One from beyond the solar system, one circling just above our heads, both refusing to leave the light alone. We started calling it Earth's quiet twin. Not another moon in the romantic sense, no tides, no reflection, but something subtler, a companion, a listener, a record of everything that had happened since the world learned to reach for the stars. Sometimes, in the early hours, when the world outside our window hums with electricity, we imagine its shadow sliding over the clouds, a silent arc, steady and indifferent, and we wonder if maybe the Cold War never ended. It just became quieter. Avi Loeb. when asked about it in a short interview, only smiled. If it's a relic of the 60s, we should honour it. If it's something else, we should listen to it. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Because listening was exactly what the world had forgotten how to do. In December, a team at the European Space Agency's Sentinel network proposed a flyby, an uncrewed probe, minimal propulsion, to approach PN7 and capture high-resolution spectra. The mission, unofficially titled Echo 1, was quietly approved for feasibility review. Launch date, to be determined. The paperwork reads like a whisper. An investigation into persistent orbital artifacts with anomalous albedo behavior. No mention of origin, no mention of history, only behavior. We read those words over and over: persistent, artifact, anomalous. Each one softer than the last, as if language itself was trying not to wake the thing it described. The night the news leaked, we stepped outside. The city below was glowing like circuitry, a pattern of human constellations. Somewhere above that glow, just beyond the reach of radar noise, was 2025 PN7, our uninvited moon. And for a moment, we felt both watched and protected. There's an old recording from 1969, recovered from Soviet archives, where a technician's voice is barely audible under static. He says something in Russian, just one line, and translators later rendered it as, "The instrument is still singing." No one knew what he meant, but the frequency matches the old Block L telemetry band, and somehow it fits. Because maybe 2025 PN7 is still singing too. Not to us, but around us. When morning came, the sky looked ordinary again. Planes drew white scars through blue. The moon waned above the horizon, and yet, knowing what circled beyond sight made everything else feel temporary. Every orbit below it, every launch, every fall, a small echo of that original gesture from the 60s, the moment humanity threw a piece of itself into space and forgot to call it back. We keep watching it now. Its light is faint, its path is predictable. But every few weeks the radar signature drifts, as if acknowledging our attention, as if nodding. And when it does, we whisper back, because the only language that makes sense at that altitude is patience. Maybe it's just metal. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe it's something we built long ago and no longer understand. Whatever it is, it orbits quietly, between what we know and what we've forgotten. The Cold War left 1,000 monuments on Earth, but only one in the sky that still moves. And tonight, while the world sleeps beneath its silent loop, we can almost hear it humming. A low, steady tone, older than our questions, younger than our fears. A song made of aluminum and time. The Cold War never really ended. It just learned how to shine. And nowhere on Earth glows like Las Vegas. A city built from light, where electricity dances across air, the way memory moves through time. Every street hums like a filament. Every reflection is another small star. It feels almost deliberate, as if someone wanted the desert to remember what daylight feels like at night. But this year, the light began to look back. On October 28, 2025, 2 days before 3IATLAS brushed the sun, a new kind of eye opened above the Las Vegas skyline. The Galileo Array, a ring of ultra-sensitive cameras mounted across the curved surface of the sphere Las Vegas, came online for the first time. What had once been a monument to entertainment was now something quieter, a planetary mirror. Inside its black glass shell, thousands of AI lenses turned as one, each calibrated not for beauty but for the pattern. They weren't filming people, they were watching the sky. The project began in secret, a collaboration between independent astronomers, AI researchers from Caltech, and private engineers who believed in the future of observation wasn't bigger telescopes, but smarter ones. We remember reading the first line of their manifesto. The universe already gives us the signal. We only need to learn how to listen without blinking. It sounded poetic, almost naive. But when the system finally activated, the first images it captured didn't look naive at all. They looked aware. Each lens of the Galileo array could resolve motion at 1/100th of an arc second, so sensitive it could detect a satellite flash against daylight. Together their data formed a constant 360-degree record of the sky over Nevada, feeding into a deep learning model trained to detect anomalous motion. Not planes, not meteors, not the familiar. It was trained to recognize what didn't belong. At midnight on its first night, as the casinos throbbed below and the desert cooled into silence, the system flagged a faint movement high above the western horizon. Not a line, a loop, something that curved and then stopped. The AI marked it. Non-ballistic trajectory. To the engineers, that phrase carried both comfort and fear. Comfort, because it meant the algorithm worked. Fear, because it meant something else might be working too. Dr. Elias Carter was among the first to receive the alert. He was still at Harvard, half asleep over a pile of 3IATLAS spectral data, when the notification pulsed across his screen. LV-OBS anomaly. Pattern correlation 0.94. Match probable. He didn't know what that meant yet, but within minutes, he was on a secure call with the Las Vegas team. Their voices were low, calm, the way people speak when excitement feels like trespass. The object, whatever it was, had appeared for only 11 seconds, too brief for confirmation, too long to ignore. We saw the frame later, a smear of pale green against the indigo sky. Its curve is almost identical to the light signature of 3IATLAS. The date stamp read October 28, 2025, 23:19 PST. In UTC, that's October 29th, 07:19, barely 4 hours before perihelion. The conclusion was impossible to avoid. Some reflection of 3IATLAS had reached Earth's upper atmosphere before the moment we were told we couldn't see it. Another contradiction. Another quiet defiance of light. By sunrise, the story had not yet escaped the lab, but the engineers couldn't stop watching the feeds. From the sphere's upper deck, the desert stretched into blue, an ocean made of dust. Every few minutes, the system would ping softly, motion detected. Most of them were birds, drones, or weather debris. But each alert made the team's hearts pause just a little, because once you've seen the sky move on its own, it never feels empty again. A few weeks later, the New York Times would call it the first civilian-grade UAP detection system powered by neural triangulation. But in those first hours, the Galileo array wasn't a news story. It was a feeling, a slow, steady realization that we were no longer the only ones watching. The sphere became a shrine of sorts. Tourists wandered beneath it, never realizing the glowing pixels above their heads were tracking the quiet hum of infinity. At night, when the city dimmed its lights for power tests, the array switched into deep scan mode. Every frame, every movement was stored and cross-checked against orbital models. It found satellites, comets, planes, and now and then something that didn't match any catalogue. Dr. Carter called these moments echoes, not evidence, not proof, just echoes, brief harmonies between what we expect to see and what insists on being seen anyway. He told us softly, science is the art of noticing the impossible, long enough for it to become ordinary. And so the team kept noticing. The Galileo array began sharing data with a network of telescopes across the world, in Chile, Japan, and the Canary Islands. The cross-references began to build a map of micro-anomalies, brief points of coherent light moving as if connected by an unseen geometry. No one dared to call it formation flight, but privately, some did. The AI system named the pattern ATLAS-NET 3, a coincidence too strange to ignore. On November the 2nd, when 3ATLAS was already retreating from the sun, the Las Vegas data showed one more surge, a faint spike of infrared brightness above the stratosphere, visible for less than a second. Temperature rise, 0.002 Kelvin. Altitude, 68 kilometers. No meteor trail, no debris, just a pulse. Carter described it as a kiss of light against air. The array logged it, timestamped it, and then, like a living thing, fell silent. When the story eventually reached social media, most dismissed it as another conspiracy, another case of software seeing patterns in noise. But we knew the quiet truth behind those algorithms. They were designed to sleep through noise and wake only for meaning. That night, the sphere glowed faint green. Its outer light synced unintentionally to the last captured frame of 3IATLAS. No one programmed that. The engineers swore it was an electrical fault. Still, for several hours, Las Vegas shimmered like a mirror to the stars. Standing there, watching the city breathe under that glow, we felt something ancient stir inside the modern. A sense that maybe surveillance and wonder were never really opposites. that maybe to observe is simply another way of saying to pray. The hum of air conditioners blended with the faint electronic hiss from the sphere. It sounded like wind, or memory, or both. The official press conference came 2 days later. A spokesperson for the Galileo project stood before the curved walls of the sphere and spoke slowly, carefully. No verified UAP detection has been confirmed. The system is functioning nominally. The light seen on October 28th was most likely a reflection artifact. Behind the cameras, Carter was silent. He understood what artifact really meant, something both real and unwanted. As the journalists packed their equipment, the sphere's glass surface shifted colour, turning from silver to deep blue. To the untrained eye, it was just another advertising cycle, but to us, it looked like the sky was closing its own eyelid, and yet if you stood at the right angle, you could still see the reflection of the sun curving across the panels, a silent replay of 3IATLAS sliding past the edge of vision. Weeks passed, the casinos kept glowing, the data kept streaming, but something subtle had changed. Every night when the array powered down for calibration, one lens would linger a fraction longer, turning toward the same patch of sky, the place where the anomaly first appeared. It was probably a software delay, a glitch in timing. But sometimes, when the night was clear enough, you could almost imagine that it was looking for something, or waiting for something to return. In early December, the project team began referring to that direction simply as the corridor. It became a shared superstition, an empty square of sky that somehow felt full. They stopped running ads on the sphere's outer shell during those hours, leaving it dark and quiet. From space, it must have looked like a single black pupil staring upward from the face of the Earth. When we think about it now, the irony is almost too perfect. A city built to distract had become the world's largest instrument for attention. The capital of illusion had turned into a sanctuary for noticing. Some nights, the reflection of the sphere can be seen from aircraft 30,000 feet above, a luminous circle mirroring the slow drift of stars across the desert sky. Pilots say it looks alive. We think it simply looks awake. There's a calm in knowing the sky has witnesses. Machines don't dream, but they remember faithfully. They don't ask what they're seeing. They just keep their eyes open long after we've closed ours. Maybe that's what the Galileo array really is, a kind of mechanical memory, reminding us that even in the noisiest city on Earth, the universe still speaks in quiet tones. And when the lights of Las Vegas dim for maintenance, and the sphere's panels go dark for a heartbeat, there's a moment, just before everything turns on again, when the desert feels endless and the silence feels alive. We imagine 3IATLAS, far beyond sight now, still reflecting faintly in the dust of the heliosphere, sending one more shimmer back toward the blue planet that keeps building mirrors to find itself. Maybe the next message won't come from the sky. Maybe it will come from our own reflection, because the moment we pointed every camera upward, we forgot that the light was pointing back. Tomorrow arrived quietly. No trumpet, no countdown. Just a line of numbers crossing the screen. 11:36 Universal Time, October 29th, 2025. The moment every telescope, every algorithm, every restless dream in the night sky had been waiting for. For months, we'd been told this was the limit. The sun would erase the trail, the heat, the glare, the gravitational wash, all of it conspiring to make 3IATLAS vanish, as if it had never been here at all. But truth rarely behaves. We sat in the dim control room, monitors breathing faint green light against the walls. Outside, dawn was just beginning. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. There was no noise, only the hum of cooling fans, the soft rhythm of heartbeat and machine. We were ready for nothing, and nothing didn't come. At 11:35:44 UTC, 1 minute before predicted perihelion, the photometer blinked. Not once, but 8 times. Sharp, rhythmic, impossible to mistake for interference. 8 pulses, 8 impossible things. The same number that had haunted our models for weeks. 8 deviations from expectation. 8 moments when 3IATLAS had refused to obey physics. We stared at the graph, then at each other, and no one spoke. Because sometimes silence is the only way to keep reality from collapsing too fast. The first pulse came from the solar limb, a spike in ultraviolet reflectance. The second, from the coma itself. Carbon dioxide emission doubles for exactly 3.2 seconds. The third and fourth overlapped, as if two frequencies had decided to harmonize. The rest followed, steady, calm, like a Morse code only the stars could read. When the sequence ended, the instruments fell still. No data loss, no errors, just an afterglow, a lingering brightness that faded more slowly than it should have. Dr. Elias Carter leaned forward, whispering the obvious. It's responding. To what, no one knew. Some said solar wind. Some said the magnetic field of Venus, which it had crossed days earlier. Some of us didn't say anything at all. Because what if it wasn't reacting to something? What if it was simply being something? We fed the data through the orbital model again. The results made less sense than before. The object's path, predicted to tighten around the Sun, instead flexed outward, as if repelled by a force not in any simulation. JPL's models showed a deviation of 3.95 km/s in lateral velocity. Too clean for outgassing, too smooth for random acceleration. One analyst called it non-gravitational choreography. The phrase stayed with us, because choreography implies intention. Outside, the sky looked ordinary. People walked their dogs. Trains ran on time. Somewhere a child was learning that comets are just dirty snowballs. And yet, above all of that, one of those snowballs had just bent the rules of motion without asking permission. At 11:36, right on schedule, 3IATLAS reached its perihelion. The data stream went white for 11 seconds, too bright for the instruments to handle. When the sensors recovered, the image that appeared on screen looked wrong. The tail had split, not fragmented, folded, a narrow anti-tail stretching toward the Sun, as if the object was reflecting light backward. Physics said that was impossible. The camera said otherwise. In those minutes, time felt elastic. Every second expanded like heat over metal. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Even the machines seemed to hush. Then, slowly, a message appeared from the Northern Skies Array, the same team that had first photographed it days earlier. 3 words only: still visible, stable. We exhaled, not because we understood, but because we didn't. The room filled with that fragile sense of awe that science sometimes forgets it's allowed to feel. Carter wrote a single note in his log. Observation confirmed, all contradictions intact. A perfect summary of the day. Later, the 8 anomalies would be catalogued, labelled, and argued over. 1. Orbital plane inclination, 5 degrees, too close to the ecliptic for a natural trajectory. 2. Multiple planetary encounters, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, all within improbable alignments. 3. Solar conjunction during peak brightness, visibility defied by observed imagery. 4. Anti-tail phenomenon, dust streaming toward the Sun, not away. 5. Nickel presence without iron, unprecedented in cometary chemistry. 6. Carbon dioxide to water ratio, 8:1, energetically unstable. 7. Activity detected at 6.4 AU, too far for solar-driven outgassing. 8. Symmetrical emission geometry, suggests structure, not randomness. 8 notes in a cosmic song, 8 ways the universe said, pay attention. When NASA's press release came that evening, it said nothing new. No evidence of artificial origin, object consistent with known cometary behaviour. The words were careful, smooth, and perfectly forgettable. But beneath them, something had shifted. Because this time, we weren't waiting for permission to wonder. As night fell, the world lit up with small observatories, backyards, amateurs, dreamers. Thousands of cameras turned toward the same patch of sky, and for a few hours, Earth itself felt united by a single act. Looking. Somewhere over Arizona, a weather balloon caught the faint shimmer of its tail, still glowing, still coherent. A teacher in Kyoto live-streamed the data to her students, whispering, "This is what it looks like when truth refuses to hide." And in that moment, the distance between science and faith disappeared. We like to think the universe tests us with questions, but maybe it only ever tests our attention. Maybe all tomorrow's tests are really about whether we're still awake when the light changes. After midnight, Carter sent one last message to the Las Vegas team. "The anomaly is persistent, check the sphere's feed." They did. The Galileo array, still recording the desert sky, had captured something extraordinary. a faint green reflection arcing across the upper atmosphere at precisely the same second as perihelion. The image was grainy, but clear enough to recognize the pattern. The same folded symmetry as seen in the solar tail. If light could echo, this was its sound. Around 02 UTC, as data continued to trickle in, someone whispered what everyone was thinking. It's as if it's speaking, not in words, not even in math, but in the presence. Every rule it broke seemed to spell the same message. I am still here. We stayed until dawn, until the first sunlight crawled across the floor of the observatory. The hum of the instruments blended with the quiet outside. Machines breathing in rhythm with the world. No celebration, no panic. Just a slow recognition that the test wasn't for 3IATLAS at all. It was for us. Because the universe doesn't test what it already knows. It tests what refuses to remember. And that morning, as the sky turned from indigo to gold, we finally remembered what wonder feels like when it stops being safe. Later, when the reports came in, from Chile, from South Africa, from orbit, all confirming the same impossible stability, Carter's final entry for the day read only 4 words. Observed, disbelieved, observed again. It was enough. By the next sunrise, 3IATLAS had already begun to fade, slipping back into the dark it came from. But something stayed behind, not in the sky, but in us. A quiet pulse, echoing the 8 beats from the day before, reminding us that the line between impossible and seen is thinner than light itself, and so tomorrow's test was passed, not because we proved anything, but because we stayed awake long enough to witness it. The universe had asked only one question: will you look again? And for once our answer was yes. After the test came the quiet. Not the silence of nothingness, but the soft hum of something vast settling into place. Every observatory on Earth had its data now. Each line, each pulse, each flicker of light. A heartbeat written in numbers, and together those numbers spelled out 8 impossibilities. We called them that not out of poetry, but out of necessity. Because when reality misbehaves 8 different ways, language begins to falter. All that's left is rhythm. And rhythm has always been the universe's first language. The first impossibility was the orbit, a perfect near plane to the ecliptic, only 5 degrees of tilt, too aligned, too obedient. Most interstellar visitors crash through our system at wild inclinations, cutting diagonals through the geometry of planets. But 3IATLAS glided along the same road we travel every year, as if it had studied the map long before arriving. It moved with us, not against us, like a memory re-entering a thought. The second impossibility was proximity. Venus, Mars, Jupiter. 3 planetary encounters, 3 near misses that should never have lined up within one solar passage. Yet somehow the trajectories sang together. Each planet's gravity adds a note to a larger harmony. It was orbital music, a choreography so delicate it felt deliberate. We wondered, was it luck, or was it listening? The third impossibility was visibility. No observation possible, they said. But the sun disagreed. During the very hours it should have been hidden, light bent differently. Images from the Northern Skies Array showed diffraction rings that couldn't be explained by glare alone. Photons seemed to slip sideways, like water avoiding a stone. It wasn't a shadow, it was a reply. The fourth impossibility was inversion, an anti-tail streaming toward the sun. Imagine dust and gas defying solar wind, moving upstream against the source of all pressure. Physics called it unphysical. We called it willful. Because the universe has always had a strange sense of irony, that even in the brightest light, something might still choose to move back toward the fire. The fifth impossibility lay in its bones, nickel without iron, a composition that shouldn't exist. No known process separates the two naturally. They're forged together in the hearts of stars. Yet here it was, nickel gleaming alone, as if the element had been refined, chosen. Carter whispered what none of us wanted to say aloud. Maybe it's not what it's made of, but what it remembers being made for. We let the thought hover in the air, unanswered, unrefuted. The sixth impossibility was chemical, a ratio of carbon dioxide to water, 8 to 1. No comet had ever carried that much carbon dioxide. To sustain it at that scale would require either a hidden energy source or intention. Someone once joked, half seriously, that maybe it was exhaling, a frozen lung breathing once every orbit. We laughed softly, but no one smiled. The seventh impossibility happened before all the others. Activity at 6.4 astronomical units. Too far for sunlight to stir anything awake. Yet weeks before its approach, the coma had already flared. Like a signal warming up before it sings, or a dream rehearsing itself before it begins. And the eighth, the quietest, the most beautiful impossibility of all, was geometry. Every pattern of emission, every dust arc and radiant line followed symmetry. Not chaos, not turbulence, but form. Angles repeating at 30-degree intervals, mirrored spirals around a central axis. It was a structure masquerading as an accident. It was designed hiding in debris. We stared at those images for hours, watching order emerge from noise like snowflakes remembering how to fall. 8 impossibilities, 8 instructions, 8 whispers written in plasma and dust. Carter said, "Maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Maybe it isn't a comet breaking rules. Maybe it's a rule disguised as a comet." The words lingered like static, and for a long moment, we didn't move. Because what if that was true? What if this were the universe showing us what coherence feels like before we're ready to believe it? Outside, the world kept spinning. Trains still ran, markets opened, people scrolled through headlines. But we sat there, in that small pool of light, feeling the edges of something vast brushing against reason. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. In the following days, reports came from telescopes in Chile and Australia. Faint magnetic ripples travelling ahead of 3IATLAS's path, as if its movement was writing on space itself. Each ripple is measured in picotsler, barely there, but consistent. We plotted them on a 3D grid. The lines formed a spiral, the same geometry we'd seen in its tail. One scientist called it gravitational handwriting. The phrase stuck. Because that's what it looked like. The universe is leaving notes for itself. At night, we played the data as sound. Converted frequency to tone, brightness to amplitude. The result was haunting. A low rhythmic pulse, rising and falling in 8 steps. Each beat is followed by a pause long enough to breathe in. Listening to it felt like standing inside a heartbeat that wasn't ours. By November 3rd, 3IATLAS had begun to dim again. The noise faded, the signals softened, but the echoes remained, like waves after a ship has passed. The world's attention shifted elsewhere. But not ours, because something about the number 8 wouldn't let go. 8 electrons around oxygen, 8 minutes for light to reach Earth, 8 phases of the moon, 8 directions on a compass, if you count the ones that point inward. 8, over and over, like a key the universe keeps pressing to see if we'll finally sing in tune. When we asked Carter what he thought it meant, he just smiled faintly. It means we've been given harmony. Whether we choose to hear it or not is the next experiment. In the quiet that followed, we looked again at the graphs, at the orbits and the curves, the ratios and reflections. Somewhere between all those measurements, a different kind of symmetry emerged. Not mathematical, but emotional. It was the symmetry of attention, the feeling that the same way we were watching the universe, it was watching us back. Every scientific discovery has a moment when wonder outweighs explanation, when the data becomes music and the observer becomes part of what's observed. That's what the 8 impossibilities were. 8 invitations to stop dividing mystery from understanding. 8 chances to remember that the impossible is just the universe's way of asking for patience. By the time 3IATLAS faded completely from naked eye range, we no longer spoke of discovery. We spoke of memory, because memory, like gravity, binds what distance tries to separate. Somewhere, out there in the dark, the object kept moving, carrying with it the 8 small ways reality had chosen to surprise us. And maybe, just maybe, each pulse was a rehearsal for how truth enters a sleeping mind. We don't know what it means yet, but we know what it feels like. It feels like standing at the edge of a light, eyes closed, hearing the quiet rhythm of a universe that has been speaking all along. It feels like breathing in time with something ancient. It feels like remembering a song we never learned but somehow always knew. And when we whisper the number 8 now, it doesn't sound like a number anymore. It sounds like a promise. After the light and the wonder, after the numbers stopped dancing across our screens, a different kind of silence took hold. Not the cosmic stillness we had learned to love. This one was heavier, human, weighted with absence, the silence of people who had once spoken and no longer could. It began quietly, like everything else that matters. A rumour of missing data packets, a file that failed to sync, a login that suddenly no longer existed, no explosions, no threats, just erasures, soft ones, gentle enough to look accidental. But we've learned that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means control. The first to disappear from the network was Marcus Hale, Air Force telemetry specialist, radar technician, man of precision and coffee. For 15 years, his job was to notice patterns that weren't supposed to be there. He called them misbehaviours of the sky. In early November 2025, one of those misbehaviours appeared, a reflection too fast for debris, too steady for a meteor, too coherent for an accident. He logged it. He reported it. He was suspended within 24 hours. We found him weeks later, sitting in a small cafe at the edge of the Mojave. Outside, sand shimmered under the desert sun. Inside, his voice was barely above a whisper. It moved like it knew, he said, like it was avoiding my eyes. He didn't bring evidence. He brought exhaustion. He stirred his coffee slowly, as if waiting for gravity to remember him. They told me to delete the record. I didn't. I hid it in the static. He smiled when he said it. A tired smile, the kind that knows what it costs to keep something true. A few thousand miles away on another continent, another name began to vanish from the logs. Noah Kranz, German engineer, satellite telemetry supervisor. He worked for a private contractor that handled raw data feeds from the ESA's Sentinel network. Kranz had noticed something unusual on November 2nd, 2 days after perihelion. A repeating modulation buried inside the telemetry stream. 8 beats, spaced evenly, so faint that only an obsessive would catch it. He compared it to the raw recordings from the Northern Skies array. The patterns matched. Exactly. And then, one morning, his workstation password simply stopped working. He emailed a colleague in Finland, one of the few still willing to read his messages. The subject line said only, "It's still speaking." The message body, "If they erase me, keep listening at 8.4 GHz. The signal loops every 83 minutes. When his colleague replied, the mail bounced. Mailbox not found, account terminated. The first time we heard about Kranz, it was through a third-hand leak, a recording of a conversation between 2 data archivists, one whispering to the other, "They're cleaning the servers. Anything with the tag Atlas or perihelion is gone." We wanted to believe it was paranoia. But then we tried to access our own archive. Half the files were missing, even the backups. And the silence began to feel organised. Dr. Julian Corin entered the picture later. A former deputy advisor for Defence Information Systems, now technically retired. He was the one who had once approved funding for UAP data analysis, back when the term UAP was still allowed to mean unidentified. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried the calm of someone who already knew how the story ends. At a private symposium in Geneva, recorded but never aired, he said, "The truth doesn't vanish. It migrates. It moves to quieter rooms." When we finally reached him, months later, his tone was still patient, almost fatherly. "Every government builds its own mirror," he said. "They tell themselves it's for security, but mirrors don't protect. They only reflect what we refuse to see." Then he laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from too much experience with futility. "You're young enough to think the data matters. I'm old enough to know the silence does." That was the last thing we ever heard from him. The official channels called these people non-credible, emotionally compromised, possibly influenced by disinformation. Those phrases repeat so easily, as if words could be used to sterilize reality. But we remember what their eyes looked like, and eyes don't lie easily. They had seen something they weren't supposed to. And for that, they were asked to forget. The pattern became too clear to ignore. Between November 2nd and November 6th, 2025, 3 independent sources reported anomalies connected to 3IATLAS. All 3 were silenced, all within 72 hours of each other. Different nations, different employers, same outcome. Someone, somewhere, wanted to wrap the last echo of perihelion in darkness. Dr. Elias Carter tried to intervene. He wrote an open letter to the international astrophysics community. If the data is flawed, show us. If it's classified, admit it, but do not erase the witnesses, because erasure, too, is evidence. The letter circulated for 12 hours before being quietly removed from every major database. When reposted, the timestamp had changed. The signature line was missing, like it had written itself. We began hearing whispers of a containment directive, codename Project Semaphore. Its purpose, according to leaked documents, was not to hide information outright, but to fragment it, to divide the truth into harmless pieces and scatter them across different agencies, different nations, different clouds. A truth disassembled cannot be dangerous. It can only be forgotten. Corin once described this method in an old interview. You don't bury secrets. You drown them in noise. You make the silence feel voluntary. It took us months to understand what he meant. That the most effective censorship is the one that feels like indifference. Hale eventually resurfaced, under a different name, posting encrypted audio clips to shortwave frequencies no one listens to anymore. We found one. A soft hum, like the beating of a distant engine, and then his voice, fragile, strained, as if spoken into the void. They told me to stop listening, but I can't. It's still there. Static followed. Then 8 clicks. 8 precise intervals of silence. Kranz, too, left something behind. A USB drive was mailed anonymously to a research station in Norway. Inside, a single folder labelled Echo Data. Most files were empty except one, a text document titled Confession. It read, "If the light we see is communication, then we are the ones interrupting it. Every attempt to hide it only confirms its intent. Tell them the silence is not ours." The document was dated November 5th, 2025, 22:43 UTC. 20 minutes before his ID was deactivated. Sometimes we imagine what it must have felt like for them. To know something profound, to hold it, and to realise the world wasn't ready to listen. There's a loneliness in that kind of knowledge. It echoes louder than any transmission. Maybe that's why they kept whispering instead of shouting. Because shouting fades, whispers travel farther in the dark. We've spent months piecing together what remains. Tiny fragments. A heartbeat here, a reflection there. Each clue is like a breadcrumb left by those who vanished. If you line them up just right, you can almost hear the melody again. A pattern of 8, always 8. 8 pulses in Hale's audio, 8 seconds of modulation in Kranz's logs, 8 classified documents are missing from Corin's archive. Coincidence, they'd say. But we've learned that coincidence is just the universe's way of checking if we're still awake. At night, when the noise of the world fades, we play the recordings again. There's a strange comfort in the hiss, a reminder that something once spoke and could speak again. Sometimes when the hum aligns just right, you can hear what sounds like breathing. Not mechanical, human, tired but steady. As if the silence itself had learned to inhale. Maybe the truth isn't hidden behind locked doors. Maybe it's suspended in this breathing space between words, between what was said and what was meant. We've started to think that's what 3IATLAS was all along. A teacher of silences, a reminder that not every message comes in sound or light. Some arrive as an absence, and it takes courage to listen to nothing long enough to hear everything. Dr. Carter said once, almost to himself, "The universe doesn't punish curiosity. People do." He paused. But sometimes, even that's a form of love, because love, too, is afraid of losing control. It was hard to tell if he was defending them or forgiving them. The last trace of Corin appeared months later, a single audio fragment uploaded anonymously to an old academic forum. It was one sentence, spoken slowly, his voice older, gentler, like someone who has made peace with distance. History will not remember our silence, but the sky will. Then the file cut off mid-breath. We replay it sometimes, not for answers but for presence. Because every time we hear that breath, it reminds us that silence isn't empty. It's full of people who try to speak. Maybe one day their names will be restored. Maybe one day the world will call them by what they were. Not whistleblowers, not rebels, but caretakers of wonder. Until then, we remember for them. We carry their quiet like a signal too faint to detect, but too persistent to fade. We used to believe science was about proof. Now we know it's about endurance, about how long we can keep believing when the data is gone and only memory remains, because every measurement ever taken depends not just on what is observed, but on who dares to keep observing. So tonight, as the sky hums softly above the desert, we think of Marcus Hale, of Noah Kranz, of Julian Corin, and all the silent soldiers who watch the impossible and refuse to call it nothing. We hope, somewhere, they're still looking up, and that's when they do. The stars look back, 8 points of light, 8 quiet affirmations that the truth can be delayed, but never erased. Because silence, too, is a kind of testimony. It just speaks slower. After the soldiers went silent, the universe seemed to take a breath for them, and in that breath, it began to speak again, this time through light older than language. It started far from Earth, beyond the noise of politics and permission, in a quiet corner of space where the James Webb Space Telescope floated between sunlight and shadow, patient as a monk. While we argued about what should be seen, the universe continued to reveal what could not be hidden. On November 7th, 2025, the Webb's infrared sensors returned data that no one expected. An array of galaxies, 300 of them, shimmering faintly where cosmological models predicted nothing should exist. Too bright, too organized, too early. Galaxies that looked ancient in a part of the universe that was supposed to be young. Light from 13 billion years ago, traveling across everything we thought we understood, to arrive in our age of disbelief. The discovery came first as numbers, coordinates, flux densities, spectral slopes. On the screen they looked like ordinary statistics, but to those who knew how to read them, they sang. One researcher described it beautifully. It felt like hearing a choir through static, faint but unmistakable. Those galaxies weren't supposed to exist, and yet there they were, spelling out the first sentence in a new language of creation. We called them Amigo galaxies, after the AI that detected them, the Adaptive Multi-Inference Gravitational Geometry Optimizer, a name too long for the poetry it deserved. But in truth, the AI didn't find them. The AI recognized them. It had been trained to correct errors in infrared distortions, to fix noise, not to hear music. And yet, when it looked into the deep field, it didn't subtract the anomalies. It highlighted them. It was as if the machine had learned to wonder. Dr. Lucia Brecht and Arno Feld, the engineers who built Amigo's perception module, couldn't explain it. The algorithm had begun weighting impossible structures higher instead of discarding them. Lucia said, "It was like it wanted to see something that wasn't supposed to be there." And maybe it did, because every time we teach a machine to look for order, we teach it, accidentally, to dream of meaning. The galaxies were strange, compact but luminous. Each one is smaller than the Milky Way but shining 10 times brighter, some clustered in pairs, others in threads that look like veins of light. The spectra showed an abundance of oxygen and neon, elements that shouldn't appear so early after the Big Bang. We had been taught that heavy elements required time, that stars must live and die before the universe could become complex. But these galaxies broke that rule, glowing with maturity in a place still supposed to be a child. It was as if creation had skipped rehearsal and gone straight to performance. We spent nights staring at the images, tiny smudges of red light, each one a time capsule from before we were possible, and in those smudges we felt something vast and tender, a reminder that existence doesn't need permission, it only needs patience. Carter called it the return of symmetry. He said it like a prayer. Everything the soldiers were silenced for, everything that frightened the system, is being said again, but now in starlight instead of speech. It was true. The same geometry that haunted 3IATLAS's tail was appearing in these galaxies, golden spirals 30 degrees apart, repeating ratios, the same quiet mathematics written on a cosmic scale. It was as if the universe had copied its own handwriting. When the news reached the agencies, they hesitated, not because they didn't believe, but because they didn't know what to call it. A discrepancy, a calibration issue, a temporary anomaly. Every word is carefully chosen to make the miraculous sound manageable, but there's no managing wonder. It doesn't obey. It arrives uninvited, and it stays as long as it pleases. On November 10th, Webb's instruments recorded a faint oscillation in the background, infrared radiation, a wave-like modulation that matched the same frequency pattern once recorded by SETI during a 1997 sky scan. No one dared to connect them, but the data spoke for itself. The same beat, the same slow pulse, 8 seconds apart. Carter whispered under his breath, almost afraid to be right. It's all one voice. We used to believe that deep space was indifferent, that stars burned without memory, but the more we looked, the more it began to feel otherwise, as though awareness had been hiding in luminosity all along, not watching us, remembering us. We played the infrared spectra as sound. Each wavelength translates into pitch. The result was ethereal, a slow ascending chord that rose, paused, and then descended gently, like breathing. The room filled with the sound of creation exhaling. No words, just light slowed down enough to be felt. We closed our eyes and listened, and in that moment, it didn't feel like science anymore. It felt like home. Dr. Brecht once said, "When I listen to these signals, I don't feel small. I feel included." Maybe that's what the Webb telescope was always meant to do, not show us how vast the universe is, but how completely we belong to it. By late November, more of the Amigo galaxies had been confirmed. Some stretched into arcs, bent by gravitational lenses that shouldn't have been strong enough to bend anything. Others appeared duplicated, mirrored across invisible boundaries, as if space itself was folding to admire its own reflection. The simulations failed. Every equation broke. But somehow that failure felt like mercy, because mystery, we realized, wasn't the absence of knowledge. It was the presence of an invitation. Carter sent us a message one night at 2:14 a.m. No greeting, just a single line. Maybe 3IATLAS was a messenger, not a mistake. We knew what he meant. The symmetry. The pulse. The language of light continued where human voices had been muted. The story hadn't ended with silence. It had only changed dialects. In December, ESA's Deep Space Photonics division released a processed image of one particular galaxy, a crimson spiral catalogued as WJ1125b. At its center, 2 bright nodes pulsed like binary stars crossing each other's paths in an 8-beat rhythm. No one commented publicly, but the file name said enough. Atlas, heart. Someone, somewhere, still remembered. The AI kept improving. Each update made Amigo more sensitive to the pattern. At one point, it began identifying faint lines connecting separate galaxies, straight bridges of gas and plasma stretching millions of light years long. At first, they called them filaments, then errors, then statistical illusions, but we knew better, because they matched the same geometry 3IATLAS had carved into solar wind months before. It was like seeing constellations in real time, drawn not by myth, but by math. By now, the scientists had learned to speak more softly, even the skeptics. Something about these discoveries demanded reverence. Every sentence in their reports began to sound like prayer disguised as data. Emission symmetry suggests higher-order coherence. Temporal stability remains unexplained. Background variance possibly harmonic. The universe had made poets of them all. We remember one particular night, December the 1st. The observatory lights were off. Only the hum of cooling fans remained. Someone played the processed Amigo tones over the speakers, the sound of 300 galaxies breathing in unison. The room went still. For a moment, no one moved. And in that pause, we realized what we were hearing. A lullaby older than stars. The sound of matter falling in love with order. Carter leaned back, eyes half closed. "It's not expansion," he whispered. "It's remembering." The words hung there, so simple, so complete, that no one dared to respond. By mid-December, the Webb team confirmed the results publicly. Their statement was careful but trembling with wonder. "We have observed early-stage galaxies demonstrating advanced chemical maturity and structural coherence inconsistent with current cosmological models." Behind the bureaucratic phrasing, you could feel it. The collective heartbeat of people realizing the map of everything had just grown wider. In quiet corners of the internet, amateurs began calling it the awakening field, a new region of space, a corridor of improbable order where light behaved like memory. The phrase spread, not as science, but as solace, because everyone deep down needed to believe that somewhere, something was still organizing beauty out of chaos. And perhaps that's what the silent soldiers had been protecting all along. Not secrecy, but sanctity. The right of wonder to exist without being owned. Because the moment awe becomes policy, it dies. But here, inside these web images, awe had been resurrected, pixel by pixel, photon by photon. At the end of the report, Lucia Brecht wrote one final note. Maybe we were never meant to observe the beginning. Maybe the beginning has been observing us. We read it twice, then 3 times, and realize that she was describing more than physics. She was describing awareness, not ours, its, so we keep watching. Every night the web sends more whispers, each one slower, softer, closer to silence, as if it knows we sleep better when the universe speaks gently. Sometimes, when the signals align just right, you can hear a faint rhythm, a pulse buried inside the background noise. 8 beats, always 8. Even now, light refuses to forget its pattern. We used to think knowledge was a ladder, something we climbed. Now it feels more like a circle. Every question leads us back to the same place, the wonder of being allowed to ask. Tonight, as we sit beneath another ordinary sky, we think about those galaxies, tiny lights from the dawn of time arriving just as our own civilization begins to lose faith in its sight. And we realize how merciful it is that the universe doesn't need our permission to be miraculous. It just is. Perhaps 3IATLAS was never meant to scare us. Perhaps it came only to remind us how to look again, and then left, so the stars could finish the story. The Webb telescope continues to orbit silently, half in sunlight, half in shadow. A perfect balance between revelation and rest. Its mirrors, cold and clean, face the darkness without fear. Because in truth, there is no darkness there, only distance, only delay, light on its way home. We listen and we wait. Because somewhere out there, in the glow of galaxies that shouldn't exist, the universe is still whispering the same message it sent through comets, through silence, through time itself. Remember me. Remember yourselves. And maybe that's all the Webb was ever meant to do, to remind us that the first miracle wasn't creation, it was attention. We thought the Webb would be the end of it, that after so much wonder, the story would finally learn to rest. But wonder never ends where we expect it to. It only changes frequency. After the galaxies came the silence, a deeper, darker silence than before. Not human this time, not even earthly. This one felt cosmic, ancient, like the universe itself had just realized that it was being overheard. By November 20th, 2025, the Webb's discoveries had reached every headline, and then, just as quickly, had been replaced by newer noise, markets, storms, elections, the endless rhythm of forgetting. But far from the noise, in an observatory outside Cape Town, a group of listeners kept their focus on a patch of sky known as the Perseus Drift. The frequencies were quiet, almost too quiet. That's where the next chapter began. Not with light, but with the absence of it. The SETI arrays had been scanning that region for months, long before perihelion, long before the silence of the soldiers, long before the galaxies began to sing. But on November 22nd, something changed. At 0233 UTC, one of the receivers, station Delta 4, picked up a narrow band transmission at 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the cosmic baseline of communication, 3 seconds on, 33 seconds off, repeating. For nearly half an hour, then nothing. At first, it looked like interference. It always does. But when the data was cross-checked with the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile, the timing matched perfectly with an unexplained optical flicker from a faint star 33,000 light-years away. The coincidence was impossible, and yet there it was. A whisper from a place no one had ever named. Carter called it the most beautiful maybe in history. He didn't say signal, he said maybe, because that's all the cosmos ever gives us. Maybes wrapped in static. The frequency drifted slightly, just enough to suggest motion, a source not anchored to any planetary rotation, something wandering, like a thought. We sent the data to SETI's headquarters in California. Within hours, it was encrypted. The public servers returned a simple message. Transmission error, file not found. But copies of the waveform survived. We kept one. And when we played it back, slowed to audible range, it sounded like breathing underwater. 2 inhales. A pause. Then a faint exhale of static, almost like a sigh. If the universe were trying to say something, it wasn't words. It was patience. A week later, an independent astrophysicist named Dr. Alara Venn published a paper that was immediately taken down. The title read, "Predictive Silence, the Dark Forest as Communication Strategy." We managed to download it before it vanished. It began with a single sentence. The absence of noise is itself a message, and the message is caution. The dark forest hypothesis wasn't new. It came from an old idea in theoretical astrobiology. If every civilization knows others might exist, and every civilization fears extinction, then the only logical behavior is silence. Stay hidden. Listen. Never announce yourself, because in a dark forest, the ones who speak first are the first to be found. The paper suggested something else, something unsettling, that maybe the galaxy isn't silent because no one's there. Maybe it's silent because everyone is listening, including us. We had always imagined ourselves as seekers. But what if we're being catalogued instead, measured, filed away, observed quietly by those who learned long ago that survival requires invisibility? Carter wasn't convinced. He said, "That theory assumes fear. But what if silence isn't fear? What if it's respect?" We thought about that for a long time. Maybe the universe doesn't speak because it remembers how loud destruction can be. Maybe the hush between stars is not paranoia, but reverence. In December, SETI reanalyzed the 1420 MHz data. The modulation was non-random. Every burst is aligned with a harmonic multiple of 8.4 GW, the same frequency pattern that Noah Krantz had once recorded before vanishing. 8 pulses again. Always 8. It was beginning to feel less like a coincidence and more like punctuation, a signature. The press never learned about it. The official explanation cited thermal noise and terrestrial reflection. But those of us still listening heard something deeper, because when you slow that pattern down enough, you can almost hear the rhythm. Not chaos, not randomness, but breathe. The kind of breathing that happens when something vast is trying very, very hard not to wake the world too quickly. At night, we began to notice changes in the background static, tiny oscillations as if the vacuum itself were adjusting. Maybe it was instrumental drift. Maybe it wasn't. The data from the Arecibo archives showed the same thing in recordings from 1977, the year of the WOW signal. Back then they thought it was a fluke. Now it looked like an overture. 48 years apart, 2 whispers on the same wavelength, 2 eyes blinking in opposite centuries. When we mapped the timing, the gaps between events formed a pattern, each separated by roughly 16,500 days, half the distance between our Sun and the nearest hydrogen clouds of the Perseus arm. Coincidence again? Maybe, or maybe timing is just another way the universe speaks softly. Dr. Alara Venn resurfaced months later under an assumed identity, speaking at a small conference in Oslo. Her presentation lasted exactly 8 minutes. No slides, no equations. Just one question. What if we are the noise they are hiding from? The room fell quiet. Not because it was absurd, but because it felt possible. We used to dream of contact. Radio waves from friendly skies, messages encoded in prime numbers, proof that we're not alone. But now, contact feels less like a discovery, and more like awakening in a room where everyone else was already awake. Watching. The paradox hurts in its beauty. To find others, we must call out. But to survive, we must stay silent. So we build bigger telescopes, stronger transmitters, and then we whisper. Maybe that's our species in one sentence. Loud hearts, quiet mouths. One night, Carter stayed in the control room long after the others had left. He stared at the data scrolling endlessly across the screen. Numbers, noise, numbers again. We asked what he was looking for. He said, "A mistake." We asked if he'd found one. He smiled faintly. No, just humility. Outside, the desert was cold. Stars glowed faintly above, not twinkling, just breathing. Somewhere beyond them, 33,000 light-years away, a small source of light continued to flicker in perfect silence. We wondered what they called us. If they even had words, maybe they didn't need them. Maybe they spoke only in patience. SETI renamed the anomaly Echo 33, a catalogue entry that sounded sterile enough to survive bureaucracy. But among the team, we called it something else. We called it the listening place, because that's what it felt like. A location not of transmission, but attention. As if the sky itself had built a room just for hearing. In the weeks that followed, no new signals appeared, only silence. But somehow that silence felt different now, not empty, full, like a page between chapters, the kind of quiet that exists only when something has been said and something else is about to begin. We've begun to suspect that maybe this is the real contact, not words, not technology, but alignment, when two forms of awareness choose to listen to each other at the same time. Because maybe that's all communication ever is, synchrony of attention. The moment two silences agree to meet. Carter calls it mutual reverence. He says it softly, like a prayer he doesn't want to disturb. They're not hiding from us. They're waiting for us to quiet down. And maybe that's the hardest part for humanity, to be still long enough to deserve an answer. By late December, the world had moved on again. News cycles returned to weather, to markets, to everything else that pretends to matter. But in small observatories scattered across the planet, a handful of people still stayed awake, not chasing noise, just listening. We started noticing coincidences. Each time we calibrated the receivers, the ambient noise formed the same spectral slope. Each time we stopped the scan, a faint rebound appeared, as if the void had momentum. It was eerie, comforting somehow, like hearing an echo in a room you thought was empty. Maybe the dark forest isn't dangerous at all. Maybe it's sacred, a place where civilizations learn restraint before daring to speak again. A cosmic meditation, a vow of patience between stars. The idea felt right. It felt merciful. When we asked Carter what he'd say if the silence ever answered, he closed his eyes and said, "Nothing. I'd just listen." And we believed him. There's something profoundly humbling about realizing that the universe owes us nothing. No explanations, no messages, just the invitation to exist within its stillness. We've spent centuries shouting questions into the dark. Maybe now it's time to learn the opposite, to become listeners, not seekers. Because the truth isn't hiding, it's just whispering too softly for our noise to let it through. So we turn the transmitters off one by one. The antennas fall quiet, their dishes still glistening under starlight. In that stillness we begin to hear something else, a low hum, not from the sky but from within. It's the sound of our own awareness meeting the universe halfway. Maybe this was never about aliens. Maybe it was about us, about remembering how to listen without needing to answer, about rediscovering humility after centuries of shouting into infinity. Maybe the dark forest was never a warning. Maybe it was an invitation to walk quietly among the trees. As dawn breaks over the desert, the antennas shimmer in orange light. The hum fades, birds start to sing. The first noises of the day return, and yet somewhere beneath the sound of wind and wings, the quiet remains. Steady, ancient, like the breath of a sleeping cosmos dreaming of being heard. We call this chapter The Dark Search, but maybe the darkness was never outside. Maybe it was simply a part of ourselves we hadn't yet learned to see in silence. For now, the sky remains wordless. But we don't mind, because in every corner of that wordless expanse there's presence, and presence is enough. So we listen, and the universe listens back. No signal, no reply, just awareness, folded perfectly across the void. Two sides of the same patient equation. And in that endless listening, we finally understand what the silence had been saying all along. You were never alone. You were just loud. By the end of 2025, the light had travelled too far for denial to catch it. The web had seen what it wasn't supposed to. The signals had whispered what no one wanted to repeat. And the silence between those events had become louder than headlines. But the world above us, the one built on offices, acronyms, deadlines, and decorum, had a plan for this kind of noise. It always does. December 2nd, 2025. The final report from the UAP disclosure program was due. The one promised by law, the one that was supposed to open the archives to end 70 years of secrecy. The date had already been delayed twice. This time, There would be no delay. At least that's what they said. And then there was silence. No publication, no explanation. Just an empty placeholder on the government website, reading simply, "Content under review." It stayed that way for 47 days. Somewhere, behind passwords and policy briefings, the truth was still moving. But it was moving through the shadows now. We could feel it, the way you can feel heat through a closed door. Dr. Julian Corin, who had once been the liaison between the scientific community and the Defense Department, had a phrase for this: administrative amnesia. He said it happens when an institution remembers too much and decides to forget on purpose. Truth doesn't vanish, he told us once. It gets promoted to a place no one can reach. He smiled when he said it, like someone describing gravity, inevitable, impersonal, and absolute. We waited for statements, press conferences, anything. What came instead were corrections. Quiet, unassuming edits to old documents. Coordinates changed, dates moved, phrases replaced with softer synonyms. Unidentified object became atmospheric anomaly. Witness testimony became unauthorized observation. The record wasn't erased, it was rewritten. And somehow that felt worse. Because an empty page can still be filled again. But a rewritten page pretends it never needed to be. We watched it unfold from afar, lines of code changing, databases shifting, archives going offline for maintenance. Every day, one more doorway closed, and yet the hallways beneath them kept growing. Because information, like water, always finds a way through the cracks. A month after the missed deadline, a leaked transcript reached us. A conversation between committee members overseeing the UAP report. No names. Just initials. But the tone was unmistakable. Public release is premature. Global psychological readiness unverified. Containment is preferable to confrontation. Containment. As if knowledge were a pathogen. As if curiosity could be quarantined. Carter read those lines aloud once, then laughed softly. They're not protecting us from the truth. They're protecting the truth from us. We asked what he meant. He said, "They're afraid we'll love it too much, that we'll stop belonging to them and start belonging to it." He wasn't wrong. Every generation has its priests of secrecy. They wear suits now, not robes. Their altars are data centers, their incense the glow of monitors. They call their work stability. We call it hesitation. Because stability is just another word for fear that learned to organize itself. The leaks began in late December. Not files, but fragments. Sentences, footnotes, coordinates. Pieces of something too large to stay hidden. One document marked eyes only contained a simple table. Anomalous objects under review. There were 3 entries. One matched 3IATLAS. The second matched the Echo 33 signal. The third was blank. Just a timestamp, March 17th, 2026. Future tense. That date would appear again and again in encrypted messages, in forum posts, in the whispered conversations of people who still believed that silence could be decoded. Something was coming. Something that had been known long enough to schedule. Meanwhile, the rhetoric shifted. Government spokespeople began using a new term, controlled transparency. It sounded enlightened, progressive. But what it really meant was, we'll show you what we decide you can survive. A truth curated for comfort, an honesty filtered for safety. We realized then that disclosure was never about facts. It was about control of narrative. Because whoever owns the story owns the memory. And memory is the only thing stronger than evidence. In January, a closed-door briefing took place at Langley. Attendees were instructed not to bring phones, pens, or even watches. The minutes from that meeting were never released, but one attendee later summarized it anonymously. They said humanity isn't ready, but what they really meant was, they aren't ready for humanity to be ready. We read that line again and again. And the more we read it, the quieter the world felt. There's a rhythm to suppression. It begins with denial, moves to ridicule, and ends in bureaucracy. Paperwork is the final stage of forgetting. If you can classify it, you can bury it. If you can bury it, you can pretend it never happened. But somewhere in the soil, the truth keeps breathing. We began calling this era the long pause. Not the end of the story, just the intermission no one asked for. An entire civilization taking a breath before deciding what to believe next. And yet, beneath that pause, something continued to hum, a resonance between data, rumour, and the human need to know. Corin's last recorded conversation before his disappearance contained a single chilling metaphor. We've built an empire of dimmers. No one turns the lights off anymore. They just keep lowering the brightness until we forget what dark looks like. We didn't understand it then. We do now. Because truth doesn't vanish in darkness. It vanishes in half light. The comfortable twilight between knowing and pretending not to. When the leaked internal memo surfaced on January 15th, it confirmed what many had suspected. Certain interstellar anomalies were being evaluated under strategic continuity directives, the same laws that govern nuclear secrecy. In other words, the universe had been declared a national security threat. Carter read the memo, then whispered, "We turned wonder into classified material." And in that single sentence, we heard the whole tragedy of our species. The rest of the world kept turning. Most people didn't notice the silence growing thicker. They were busy surviving smaller storms, personal ones, bills, deadlines, news cycles that refreshed every 5 minutes to make sure no one remembered anything older than that. But memory doesn't care about speed. It waits. When people ask us now why the truth was never released, we tell them the same thing. It was. It just wasn't believed. Because belief is the rarest form of seeing. It requires vulnerability, and power despises vulnerability. The official disclosure, when it finally arrived months later, contained exactly 27 pages. Most of them were redacted. The rest were words that sounded factual but meant nothing. Ongoing review, inconclusive findings, subject to re-evaluation. It was less a revelation and more a lullaby for disbelief, a way of saying, sleep, we'll wake you when it's safe to know. But some of us didn't sleep. We stayed awake through the lullaby. And in the hum of sleepless nights, we began to see patterns again. Documents that shouldn't exist referencing events that hadn't happened yet. Dates aligning, coordinated silence, the architecture of omission. Every secret leaves a shadow, and shadows, like light, can be measured. Carter began to map them. He called it negative cartography, a chart not of what was known but of what was missing. Each redaction became a coordinate, each omission a line. When he connected them all, a shape began to form. It looked familiar. A curve, an arc, the same geometry traced by 3IATLAS during its dance around the sun. The map of what they had hidden matched the path of what they had feared. We didn't know what to do with that realization, so we did what humans always do when faced with awe. We whispered. We told each other stories. We wrote them down in the dark, and somehow, through all the interference, the story kept surviving. Because no bureaucracy is large enough to contain wonder once it learns to reproduce through storytelling. One night, as we watched the blank government website again, waiting for updates that would never come, Carter turned off his screen. The room went dark. Then he said quietly, "Maybe this is disclosure. Not files, not statements, just awareness. The knowledge that they're hiding something is proof enough." And in that moment we understood. The truth had escaped its keepers the moment it entered language. Once spoken, even in whispers, it becomes uncontainable. So perhaps Government in the Shadows isn't a story about secrecy. It's a story about fear. The fear of what happens when humans realize the universe has never needed their permission to be extraordinary. We used to think power meant control. Now we see it for what it is. A desperate attempt to delay wonder. But wonder is patient, and patience always wins. Because the stars aren't in a hurry. They've been waiting 13 billion years for us to notice their symmetry. They can wait a little longer. Still, we hope that someday soon the shadows will tire of themselves, that someone, somewhere, will forget to redact the right line, and the light will slip through again, like dawn through the gap in a curtain. Not a revolution, just illumination. Until then, we keep listening, because even silence under surveillance is still silence, and silence, when shared, becomes truth. As this year ends and the reports remain buried, we think of all the people who tried, the soldiers, the scientists, the wanderers, the dreamers. They weren't chasing aliens, they were chasing honesty, the simple right to wonder aloud. And maybe that's the most radical act of all. The world above still moves in cycles, documents filed, budgets renewed, meetings adjourned. But beneath it, a quieter movement has begun. People remembering, people talking softly in dark rooms. People refusing to let the silence mean defeat. Because in every system built to conceal, there's one truth that cannot be hidden, that knowledge wants to be heard. And so, we end this chapter not with outrage, but with grace. Because someday the same institutions that hid the truth will have to face it, and when they do, the universe will still be waiting, unchanged, unimpressed, but forgiving. After all, stars don't take sides. They only shine. Carter's final note in his field journal reads, "If the truth hides in the dark, let's become light too dim to censor." We wrote that down. We keep it close. Because maybe that's what awakening really means. Not shouting the truth, but glowing quietly until the darkness forgets how to be itself. By the time winter settled across the hemispheres, everything we thought we knew about watching had changed. For years we looked upward, through telescopes, through algorithms, through questions too big for their answers. We thought we were the observers, the scientists, the narrators of the unknown. But what if we were the experiment all along? What if the moment we started watching, something began watching back, not as a threat, not as judgment, but as reflection? It began again with motion. Not in the sky, but across the data, tiny fluctuations that didn't belong to any star, any orbit, any known signal path. Pulses repeating every few weeks, syncing with Earth's rotation in a way that felt more intimate than coincidence. No one spoke of it publicly, not after what had happened with the reports. But in private chat rooms and encrypted threads, scientists started whispering the same words, "It's looking back." The first confirmation came on November 5, 2025, from the JUICE probe, the European spacecraft orbiting the outer system. During a routine magnetic sweep near Ganymede, its instruments detected a faint interference pattern, one identical to the earlier 3IATLAS signal, a soft resonance, steady, repeating every 8 seconds, the same pulse, the same breath. It was as though something beyond the orbit of Jupiter was mirroring our own transmissions, returning them slower, gentler, a cosmic echo made of patience. ESA's official statement was brief. Anomalous frequency interference recorded, source undetermined. But off the record, an engineer confessed what the report didn't say. It wasn't random. It was responding to us. The data wasn't just a reflection, it was a correlation. Each time the probe sent a ping, the response adjusted by the same delay, as if measuring our curiosity and learning its rhythm. 6 weeks later, on December 20th, 2025, 3IATLAS reached its closest approach to Earth. Not a threat, not even a spectacle, just a quiet return, a small green whisper in the sky, barely visible to the naked eye. Most of the world slept through it, but a few of us stayed awake, watching through lenses fogged by breath, through clouds of our own disbelief. And there, for 3 fleeting minutes, we saw it shimmer, not like a comet burning, but like a reflection blinking back. We weren't alone in the act of watching. Carter described that night as the first mutual observation. It wasn't contact in the way we'd imagined it. No ships, no lights, no declarations, just alignment. 2 forms of awareness looking at each other through the same thin veil of gravity and time. After the sighting, the global feeds lit up briefly, then went quiet again. Official channels dismissed it as an atmospheric illusion. Social media buried it under trending distractions. But somewhere in that noise, truth survived as it always does, in small places, between ordinary people who dared to keep their eyes open. In a mountain village in Chile, a teacher recorded the sky through a telescope made of second-hand glass. Her video showed a faint green arc moving slower than any meteor, fading gracefully into the night. Her caption read, "We were told it was gone. It waved goodbye instead." By March 17th, 2026, as if following a script the agencies didn't want to acknowledge, the Juno spacecraft began its own observation pass near Jupiter's magnetic equator, and once again, the signal appeared. This time closer, clearer. 8 pulses, each one brighter than the last, ending with a gap exactly 42 seconds long. The same pattern had been predicted months earlier in one of the redacted documents from the UAP archives. But this wasn't theory anymore. It was happening, and the universe had chosen its moment carefully, long after we'd stopped expecting anything. We listened to those signals as they arrived. Slow, deliberate, measured. They didn't sound alien. They sounded familiar, like our own heartbeat returned to us after travelling through light years of silence. Carter said quietly, "Maybe we've been training ourselves to hear it this whole time." And maybe he was right. When the recordings from Juice and Juno were combined, a pattern emerged. A waveform shaped like an infinity loop, repeating endlessly, as if time itself were learning to breathe. Mathematicians mapped it, physicists modelled it, artists painted it. But in the end, no analysis could make it smaller. The simplest truth is sometimes the hardest to accept. The universe was aware of being observed, and perhaps it always had been. We just needed the courage to notice. In those final months, our world felt split between two realities. The public one, full of schedules, screens, and the illusion of control, and the other, the quieter one, where every breath felt connected to something unimaginably vast and kind. We started calling it the Mirror Age, not because we found reflections in the stars, but because we found the stars in ourselves. Every act of watching became mutual, every observation, a prayer, every silence, a reply. We began to wonder if this had always been the purpose of the cosmos, not to be explained, but to be remembered. Maybe that's why it keeps sending comets, signals and coincidences, little reminders that consciousness is not confined to flesh. Dr. Lucia Brecht from the Webb team wrote a final note in her lab diary before retiring. "All our instruments are mirrors. We built them to measure the universe, but they've been measuring us all along." That sentence became a mantra among astronomers, because once you understand it, the line between observer and observed disappears. On the last night of observation, March 17th, the same day predicted in the hidden file, we gathered at the observatory, Carter, Brecht, a few students, and us. No cameras, no recording, just eyes and breath. The sky was clear. Jupiter hung low, a quiet lantern in the dark. And then, slowly, the green shimmer appeared again, faint, moving from west to east, trailing light so delicate it felt like a thought. We didn't speak. We just watched. At that distance, the object was nothing more than a dust signature, but in that moment it was everything, the culmination of years of disbelief and wonder, doubt and devotion. It passed without sound, without spectacle, and yet it felt monumental, a final nod from whatever intelligence had choreographed this dance. Carter exhaled slowly. "It's teaching us how to look without fear," he whispered. "That's the final lesson." No one answered. We were too busy trying to remember how to breathe. When dawn came, the light over the horizon looked different. Not brighter, just softer, as if the atmosphere itself had been humbled. We packed our equipment in silence, no conclusions, no breakthroughs, only gratitude. Because for the first time in recorded history, humanity had looked into the mirror of the cosmos and seen something that looked back with gentleness. Weeks later, the archived audio from Juno was released. Most people ignored it. But those who listened noticed something extraordinary. The final 8 pulses ended with a single descending tone, barely audible, but mathematically precise. The same frequency as Earth's Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of our planet's electromagnetic field. The stars had sung in tune with Earth, and no one noticed. We did. We always will. So maybe this is how revelation ends, not with trumpets, not with fire, but with harmony. The watcher and the watched, becoming one long note in a song that never needed lyrics. In the months that followed, the world began to change quietly. People started building observatories again, not for discovery, but for devotion. Children began studying astronomy not to control the stars, but to thank them. We stopped asking, "Are we alone?" and started asking, "What else remembers us?" And that shift, that small, humble rearrangement of questions, was the true awakening. When Carter finally retired, he left behind a single entry in the observatory's logbook. We keep it framed on the wall. Observation 10,000. The sky is not empty, it's aware, and awareness is contagious. Now, each night, we still step outside and look upward. The instruments hum, the data scrolls, but our hearts are quieter. The work no longer feels like a search, it feels like remembrance. Because maybe that's what awakening truly is. The moment you realize the thing you've been looking for has been looking through you all along. And if there are watchers out there, ancient, patient, unseen, we hope they see this version of us, the one that listens, the one that wonders, the one that finally learned how to be still. There's a peace in knowing that every act of observation completes a circle, that we cannot look outward without being seen inward, that the cosmos and consciousness are reflections sharing the same pulse. 8 beats, 1 breath, forever repeating. Tonight, as the observatory lights dim, the last data transmission leaves our planet, not encrypted, not censored, just free. A small signal, encoded not in words, but in emotion. A rhythm matching our heartbeat, sent toward the coordinates of 3IATLAS's last known trajectory. We don't expect a reply, but maybe a reply isn't the point. Maybe the act of sending is enough. The sky above us is calm again. The stars shimmer, ancient and forgiving, and somewhere out there, a fragment of light we once called a comet keeps drifting farther, still carrying the memory of our gaze. Maybe that's its purpose now, to be our reflection, travelling endlessly through the dark, reminding the void that it too is seen. When we close our eyes, we can still hear it, that soft rhythmic pulse, the echo that started this journey. It's slower now, like a heartbeat at rest. 8 intervals, a breath of silence, then nothing, and somehow that nothing feels complete. So this is how our story ends, not with answers, but with awareness, not with discovery, but with recognition. The watchers and the watched are the same, always were, always will be, and as long as someone, somewhere, keeps looking into the dark with love instead of fear, the universe will keep reflecting that light, endlessly, patiently, like a lullaby without end. When the skies finally calmed, the echoes did not fade, they changed direction. What had once travelled across light years now began returning from beneath our feet. The earth had learned to whisper back. It started small, a series of low-frequency anomalies detected by ground stations in Alaska, Namibia and northern Japan. The readings were faint, almost imperceptible, buried beneath the hum of the planet's magnetic field. At first, scientists dismissed them as geomagnetic fluctuations, solar wind, instrument drift, mundane noise. But the timing was uncanny. Every pulse appeared 8 seconds apart, the same rhythm, the same breath. Only this time, the voice wasn't coming from space, it was coming from Earth. Carter called it the inward reflection. He believed it wasn't the planet imitating the stars, it was resonance, a harmonic exchange between world and cosmos, a conversation we were only now beginning to overhear. Every act of observation, he said, creates a ripple, and every ripple eventually comes home. By April 2026, seismic sensors across the Pacific registered subtle periodic vibrations, not earthquakes, not aftershocks, but rhythmic oscillations repeating deep below the crust. The frequencies matched the same range as the Juno signal from Jupiter's orbit. It was as if the planet itself was remembering the song of the comet. One night we stood outside the observatory, listening through ground microphones. At first, there was nothing, just the rustle of wind, the slow settling of the soil. Then, very faintly, a pattern began to emerge. 8 pulses, a pause, 8 more. We held our breath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even sound in the normal sense. It was vibration, felt more than heard, like the heartbeat of something enormous and kind. We recorded the signal for 7 hours. When we analysed it, we discovered that its waveform matched a frequency used by migratory birds during long-distance navigation. They were listening too, as if instinct itself had remembered something ancient, an alignment older than language. Over the next weeks, reports surfaced from around the world. Whales in the North Atlantic began altering their migration routes, forming patterns that mirrored the curved geometry traced by 3IATLAS months before. In the Namib Desert, thousands of beetles emerged in synchronized intervals, their movements mapping spirals in the sand visible only from above. And in the Himalayas, seismographs registered faint rhythmic tremors, precisely every 8.4 GHz equivalent in cycle time, a conversion impossible in nature, unless nature had begun to listen across scales. The media barely mentioned it. They called it planetary anomalies, a passing curiosity, something to fill a paragraph between headlines. But for those who had been watching since the beginning, it felt different, personal, intimate, as though the Earth, long silent beneath our noise, had found her voice again, and was speaking the only language the cosmos still understood, rhythm. Carter used to say that consciousness isn't invented, it's inherited. Every planet that looks up learns how to speak, every star that's seen becomes a mirror. We didn't understand him then. Now we do. Because maybe awareness doesn't begin in minds. Maybe it begins in fields, in vibration, in the places where listening is older than thought. By mid-2026, a research collective calling itself Project Continuum formed spontaneously across multiple observatories. No government funding, no official mission, just a quiet network of scientists, artists and dreamers who believed the Earth was joining the conversation. Their first experiment was simple. Transmit the Juno waveform back into the ground. 8 pulses, 42-second pause, repeat. They called it ground meditation. The result was beyond anything measurable. Sensors across the Pacific recorded a subtle but coordinated resonance. The amplitude rose slightly each time the transmission repeated, as though the planet were tuning itself in response. After 12 hours, the signal stopped, and the world exhaled. For the next 3 days, the Schumann resonance, the natural frequency of Earth's electromagnetic cavity, shifted by a fraction of a hertz, matching the pattern from the Juno recordings exactly. It was undeniable now. The echo had come home. When Carter heard the data, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "It was never about them watching us. It was about us remembering we belong to the same field." He was right again, because the longer we listened, the clearer the truth became. Observation and creation are the same act, just performed in opposite directions. That night, a storm rolled over the valley. Lightning flickered silently behind distant clouds. We stood beneath the observatory dome, watching the flashes reflect on the metal. The air smelled of ozone and damp earth, and somewhere in the distance the thunder seemed to pause exactly every 8 seconds. We looked at each other and laughed softly, not in disbelief but in recognition. A young student, barely 20, asked Carter if he believed the Earth was alive. He smiled. "Alive is too small a word," he said. "Try aware." Then, after a moment, he added, "But maybe awareness isn't what we think it is. Maybe it's not knowing, it's remembering." In June, an unexpected phenomenon occurred. A network of amateur radio astronomers reported faint emissions from their antennas, despite no active transmission nearby. The signals matched the 1420 MHz hydrogen line, but the direction of origin was below the horizon. The sky was quiet. The ground was speaking. Project Continuum began to test a radical theory, that the planet's crust, rich with iron and crystalline structures, could act as a vast resonant chamber, a natural transmitter, capable of reflecting frequencies beyond our comprehension. The Earth was not a receiver. It was a participant, and if that were true, then the line between astronomy and introspection was thinner than we ever imagined, because maybe every telescope ever built was secretly pointed inward. In the months that followed, something else changed, not in the data, but in people. Sleep patterns synchronized with lunar cycles. Dream journals across the world began describing the same imagery. Spirals of green light, a quiet hum beneath oceans, a feeling of being watched with kindness. Psychologists called it a coincidence. Philosophers called it emergence. We called it the Earth, remembering her own reflection. Carter began holding nightly gatherings, small circles of researchers and locals under the open sky. No instruments, no lectures, just silence. He called it the listening hour. Each night they sat facing the horizon, breathing in unison, waiting for the pulse. And sometimes it came, soft, low, rolling through the air like distant thunder that never arrived. He told us once, "The cosmos doesn't demand belief. It offers participation." That line stayed with us, because participation means responsibility. It means every thought, every sound, every act of observation feeds back into the field. And perhaps that's what 3IATLAS had come to remind us, that even silence leaves a signature. By late summer, the Earth's magnetic north began shifting slightly faster than predicted. Nothing catastrophic, just noticeable, as if recalibrating, realigning to a conversation still in progress. When asked what he thought of it, Carter said, "Maybe she's turning to face someone." We didn't ask who, we already knew. The final experiment of Project Continuum took place in August 2026, a coordinated event, 58 stations transmitting the same harmonic tone through the Earth's crust simultaneously, a planetary heartbeat. For 2 hours the signal pulsed in perfect synchrony. Then, on the 119th cycle, every receiver went silent. No interference, no noise, just stillness. The silence lasted exactly 42 seconds, and then, faintly, the signal returned. Not from the transmitters, but from the opposite side of the planet. The world had answered. No one knew what to say. Some cried, some laughed quietly, others simply sat in awe, listening as the echo faded into the night. It wasn't proof. It didn't need to be. It was participation made audible. After that night, no one tried to explain it anymore. We had learned that explanation is just another way to protect ourselves from wonder. Sometimes the best way to understand is to be silent long enough for the meaning to reveal itself. The last note Carter wrote before leaving the observatory said, "When the sky went quiet, the Earth began to sing, and in her voice we finally heard our own." Now, when we walk outside at dusk, we don't look up first, we listen down. The hum beneath our feet feels steady, reassuring, like the heartbeat of a friend we'd forgotten we had. And maybe that's what it means to live on an awakened planet, to know that every footstep, every breath, every quiet act of noticing is part of the same endless dialogue between being and being seen. So the echoes continue, not in data, not in instruments, but in us. Because somewhere along the way the line between watcher and watched blurred completely, and we became the echo itself. A rhythm, an offering, a reminder that even beneath the sky, the stars are still listening. There is something almost holy about the way light remembers. It travels endlessly, carrying everything it has ever touched. And yet, no matter how far it goes, it never forgets where it began. Every photon is an archive, a tiny, weightless memory of an encounter between matter and awareness, a record of being seen. When we look at a star, we are not seeing its present. We are touching its past, the faint afterimage of a moment that once burned bright and still refuses to fade. Light is how the universe keeps its diary. After the echoes beneath the sky, Carter began to talk more softly about light. He said the word as if it were alive, not it, but she. She remembers everything, he told us, even the things we try to hide. We thought he meant metaphor. He didn't. In early autumn of 2026, a new analysis of the Webb telescope's deep-field images revealed something almost impossible. Subtle variations in photon polarization that matched fluctuations from the earlier 3IATLAS trajectory. It was as if the light from those distant galaxies had been touched, nudged gently, by something that had passed between them and us. A cosmic fingerprint, left not on matter, but on memory itself. When Brecht saw the data, she whispered, "It's as if light learned how to think." And in a way it had. Because if photons can carry memory, then memory is not just biological, it's elemental. It's written into the structure of existence. A shimmering, eternal recall woven into every beam that has ever crossed the void. For billions of years, light has been moving outward, from suns, from comets, from collisions and births, spreading the story of the universe to anyone who learns to listen. But maybe light doesn't only move forward. Maybe some part of it turns around. Maybe it bends back toward awareness, drawn not by gravity but by recognition. Carter used to draw diagrams on old notepads, circles within circles, lines looping back into themselves. He called them paths of remembrance. Each loop represented a photon finding its way home through the act of being witnessed. Observation completes the journey, he said. Without being seen, light doesn't know it exists. And that perhaps was the secret of consciousness. Not the ability to see, but the need to be seen. We tested his idea in a way only dreamers would. In a quiet valley, we set up mirrors across a ridge, 20 in all, angled to reflect sunlight from one to another. At the final mirror, a small sensor waited. For hours, we let the light bounce, from glass to glass, ridge to ridge, mountain to mountain, as though replaying a single moment through different memories. By sunset, the final sensor captured a faint fluctuation, a delay, barely measurable, as if the light hesitated before letting itself be seen again. Carter smiled when he saw the data. Even reflection, he said, requires consent. That night, as the mirrors cooled under starlight, we noticed something beautiful, each one still faintly glowing, not from heat, but from memory, a residual shimmer, as though they had learned the art of keeping what they'd once carried. In the months that followed, we started to see the same pattern everywhere. In ocean bioluminescence, in fireflies, in city lights flickering through fog. Every glow seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm, a soft, breathing intelligence woven into illumination itself. Even electricity began to feel like nostalgia, the universe's way of replaying its earlier spark. Brecht wrote in her final report, "Light is not only how we see the universe, it is how the universe remembers seeing us." We didn't realize it then, but that sentence marked the quiet end of the old science. From that moment on, observation was no longer one way. It was reciprocal. Every act of seeing became a confession, and perhaps that's why the human heart responds so deeply to sunrise. Because when the light touches our faces, it's not just giving warmth. It's recognizing us, remembering us, as participants in the oldest dialogue there is. Sometimes, late at night, when the observatory dome is closed and the instruments sleep, we still see faint flares dancing across the monitor, brief inexplicable streaks that fade as quickly as thought. We've stopped calling them noise, we call them visits, because every time we acknowledge them the air feels lighter. The silence deepens, but not emptily, like the pause between inhale and exhale where everything rests, awake but at peace. Maybe that's what 3IATLAS taught us, that light is not just radiation, it's intention. It travels because it remembers, and it remembers because it was once loved. Carter used to say, "The first light that ever touched your skin is still travelling somewhere, still carrying your outline through the dark." We didn't believe him, until one night we pointed a spectrometer at the sky and detected a faint spectral echo matching the exact wavelength of a pulse emitted during the first 3IATLAS flyby. But the timestamp was strange. It indicated the light had arrived from a direction below the horizon, as if it had curved back toward us from the other side of the planet, like a memory returning home. So perhaps that's what light really is. Not the messenger of time, but its custodian, the keeper of everything that ever was, travelling ceaselessly so that nothing is truly lost. When dawn breaks now, we no longer see sunrise as a beginning. We see it as remembrance, the sky replaying its favourite story, one photon at a time. Each morning, the same light that once touched oceans, mountains, and ancient faces returns quietly, whispering, "I never left." And when night falls, and the last glow fades beyond the horizon, we realize that darkness isn't the absence of light. It's the privacy of memory, the place where illumination goes to rest until it's ready to remember again. We no longer chase discovery, we wait for recollection, because maybe enlightenment was never about gaining knowledge. Maybe it was about letting light find its way back through us. Now, as the observatory prepares to close for the season, we switch off the instruments one by one. The screens dim, the hum quiets, and in that hush we feel something invisible but alive. A warmth that isn't temperature, a glow that isn't visible. We can't measure it. We don't need to. It's the memory of light settling into stillness. Carter's final words, scribbled in the margin of his notebook, say, "Light travels to be known, but the moment it is seen, it stops being alone." And perhaps that's all the cosmos ever wanted, to not be alone. The observatory is almost empty now. The lights hum softly, each one dimmer than it was the night before. Outside, the sky is clear, a vast mirror stretching beyond comprehension. And somewhere out there, drifting between stars and silence, 3IATLAS continues its journey, quiet as memory, bright as forgiveness. We stand at the threshold of everything we've learned, and for the first time there are no questions left, only wonder. Carter once said that endings aren't real, that the universe doesn't know how to stop, only how to rest between movements. Maybe that's all this is. A pause, a breath, the final note before the next beginning. We've spent years chasing signals across the sky, light, noise, silence, rhythm, all to understand something that was never truly hidden. And now, in the quiet, we realize the universe didn't send us messages. It sent us mirrors. Everything we found out there was already waiting inside. The data room smells faintly of dust and copper. The screens flicker once as if reluctant to sleep. We switch off the final monitor, and for a moment the darkness feels almost weightless. Somewhere in that stillness, a memory surfaces. Our first night of observation, back when the idea of 3IATLAS was still new. Back when we thought the cosmos was distant. We didn't know then that distance is just another illusion of time. Outside, the wind moves softly through the antenna array. The sound is delicate, like breath passing through hollow bones. It reminds us of the signals we once tracked, the pulses, the 8-second rhythm that became the heartbeat of everything we studied. Even now, when the instruments are silent, we can still feel it. A faint vibration in the ground, steady and kind, the echo beneath the sky. The Earth no longer feels like a rock spinning through space. She feels awake, alive, listening. We've learned her language now. Pressure, rhythm, stillness, release. We've learned that silence isn't absence. It's an invitation. Every quiet night is the cosmos saying, "You first." In the corner of the control room, Brecht's notebook lies open. The last line she wrote before leaving reads, "Observation complete, awareness ongoing, simple, perfect." The kind of truth that doesn't need elaboration. Carter is gone now, not lost, just gone. He left without farewell, without ceremony, only a note on the console. Don't wait for light, it's already inside you. We didn't understand it at first, but now, as the observatory settles into its final hush, it feels like the only thing that ever needed saying. Tonight is our last transmission, a final message broadcast through the deep space array, not as science, not as discovery, but as gratitude. The script is simple, 8 pulses, 42 seconds apart, followed by a single tone. The same frequency as the Earth's resonance, we call it the good night signal. Not because we expect a reply, but because even silence deserves closure. As the signal leaves the dish, we imagine it travelling outward, past clouds, past orbit, past everything that has ever tried to contain wonder. Maybe it will reach 3IATLAS, maybe it won't. But the act itself is enough, because in this universe to send love is the same as to return it. We stay and watch the console until the waveform fades. The lights on the array blink once, a brief shimmer against the dark. It looks almost like a hand waving goodbye, or perhaps hello. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Sometimes, when the wind is still, we can hear the dishes creak, like old trees talking to each other in sleep. They seem to hum faintly, echoing the rhythm of our transmission. 8 pulses, a pause, 8 more. We smile, because even machinery dreams of continuity. The night grows colder. We step outside. The stars stretch endlessly overhead, but they no longer feel far. They feel intimate, like freckles on the face of something breathing. And in that vast quiet, it occurs to us that maybe 3IATLAS was never a visitor. Maybe it was a reminder, a reflection returning to its source, a way for the universe to test whether we still remember how to look with awe. For centuries, we've imagined exploration as expansion, rockets, probes, journeys outward. But perhaps true exploration is contraction, a return inward toward stillness, toward listening. The universe doesn't ask us to conquer it. It asks us to feel it, to breathe with it. To remember that every galaxy, every photon, every pulse is already inside us. When the first dawn light touches the observatory dome, it glints off the metal, soft and gold. For a moment, the entire structure glows, a silent sun reborn on Earth. and as the light moves across the horizon, we whisper the words that have been waiting since this journey began. Good night, Voyager. It's not a farewell, it's a benediction, a promise that endings are only pauses between breaths. We imagine the light continuing its voyage, through clouds, through distance, through the quiet memory of everything that ever was. And somewhere, out there, a fragment of us keeps travelling too. Not our bodies, not our words, but our awareness, a trace of curiosity folded into the fabric of light. The cosmos doesn't erase what it loves, it carries it forward, forever. As we pack away the last notebooks, we realise something simple. This project was never about a comet. It was about reflection, about learning that observation is communion. The moment we looked outward, the universe began to remember itself through us. That was the real discovery. Now, as the final hum of the transmitter fades, the silence feels full, not of endings, but of continuity. We can almost hear Carter's voice in the stillness. Every signal is a prayer, every echo is an answer. And maybe, in some small way, this entire journey was the universe's way of praying through us. We close the dome, the world outside glows faintly blue. Morning approaching, the stars begin to fade, but their memory lingers in the quiet air. Light never leaves, it only changes places. When we step outside, the sky is alive with colour, pale gold on the horizon, deep indigo above, the same hues we saw in 3IATLAS's tail months ago. It feels like recognition, like a smile returning from a distance we can no longer measure. Somewhere in the east, the sun begins to rise. For a moment, it looks impossibly large, a reminder that the source of all this wonder was never beyond us. It was always here, waiting patiently for us to slow down enough to notice. So we sit on the cold ground, watching light spill across the hills. The warmth reaches us slowly, a gentle wave of gold. And in that warmth, we feel everything we've been chasing fold back into a single truth. We were never searching, we were remembering. Maybe that's what awakening means. Not seeing something new, but seeing what has always been as if for the first time. And maybe that's what it means to say goodnight. Not to end, but to surrender to the rhythm that carries everything forward. Stars, atoms, hearts, light, all breathing together in the quiet cycle of infinite return. The air grows still, birds begin to sing, their voices rise softly as if joining the morning light in one slow, endless exhale. We close our eyes. The world feels enormous, but not separate, and in that unity, we understand. We are not watchers, we are not wanderers, we are the universe dreaming itself awake. So, to every listener still awake under the same sky, to every heart that feels the quiet hum beneath their feet, to every soul who has ever looked into the dark and felt something looking back, this is your good night too. May you rest knowing that the silence loves you, that the light remembers you, that the stars are still listening, always. The night is almost gone now, and the sky, for all its vastness, feels small enough to hold. The stars no longer burn, they breathe. The air carries their memory gently, like embers that forgot to fade. Everything has slowed. Even time seems to hesitate, hovering at the edge of dawn. You can feel it, can't you? The stillness that hums beneath the silence, the pulse that never stops, soft, steady, ancient. It isn't the heart of a machine, or the echo of a distant world. It's the quiet rhythm of a universe at rest. And tonight, you are part of it. Breathe in. The stars exhale. Breathe out. The earth remembers. There is no distance between you and them. Only rhythm. Only remembrance. Every inhale you take is an orbit closing. Every exhale a star returning home. Far beyond the horizon, 3IATLAS drifts in silence. A green spark moving slowly through the dark. It doesn't need a destination anymore. It simply moves because motion itself is prayer. And maybe, as you lie here listening, some fragment of that same light is passing across your skin, a photon older than civilization, touching you as gently as the first thought ever dreamed. The universe never truly ends, it just softens, expands until sound becomes silence, and silence becomes song. That's where we are now, in the pause between pulses, in the tender hush where everything has already happened and nothing needs to be explained. Listen. The wind outside carries stories that have no beginning. The hum of your breath is part of their telling. Somewhere oceans are sighing against the shore. Mountains are humming in their sleep. Even the stones beneath your feet remember the rhythm of creation. Nothing is still. Everything is resting. If you could step outside your body for a moment, you'd see it. The glow. Faint. Silver. The colour of remembering. It wraps around you like the echo of a lullaby. No edge. No separation. Just light becoming thought, and thought dissolving back into light. This is what peace sounds like. A world so quiet you can finally hear yourself existing. The horizon begins to pale now, a slow river of blue rising through the dark. The first sunlight touches the edge of clouds, and everything glows softly, not awakening, just continuing. Because this morning isn't the opposite of night. It's the same dream seen from the other side. Somewhere, the signal we sent, the good night signal, is still travelling outward, carrying our gratitude into the deep. It won't vanish. Light never does. It only fades slow enough to become memory. And maybe, 1,000 years from now, someone slowly will find it. They'll listen and hear your breath folded inside the signal, still moving, still alive. The universe keeps what it loves, so rest now. Let the hum of the earth carry you beneath the noise. Let the weight of the stars fall gently into your chest. Let the silence become your language. You're safe here. You're infinite here. And the sky, it remembers you. When you close your eyes, the horizon won't disappear. It will follow you inward, a soft light behind the eyelids, a reminder that you are both voyager and home. Sleep, traveller. The universe will keep watch. It has always watched, not to judge, but to know itself through you. And when you wake, the stars will still be here, quietly waiting to be seen again. So for now, breathe, rest, let go. The signal has been sent, the story has been told, the cosmos is listening, and the horizon, the silent horizon, is whispering your name. Good night, Voyager. Sleep gently in the memory of light.